to see you.
Glad you're here.
Yeah, so it'll be great.
Good day, friends. It's good to see all of you. Welcome. This is going to be an awesome conversation. I can already tell. It's going to be great. There's great energy here in the room. Dr. Danielson, Dr. Hallis, and I, we spent time with the students this morning, and that was a fantastic conversation. So I am really looking forward to getting started here. Well, welcome today to today's Lawrenson Center event. My name is Michael Chan, and I am Executive Director for Faith and Learning here at Concordia College. Overseeing the Lawrenson Center is really one of the most cherished responsibilities that I have here at the school. The center honors the life and work and legacy of Norman M. Lawrenson, renowned philanthropist, former CEO of Burlington Northern, alumnus of Concordia College, and former member and chair of its Board of Regents. Through his life and generosity, Norm helped to build a joyful, just, and more trustworthy world. And in honor of that tremendous legacy, we take up the question here at Concordia College, how do we build a more trustworthy world? Today's events deal with the topic of equity in healthcare. And on that note, I'm going to hand the podium over to my colleague, Dr. Gwen Wagstrom-Hallis, Dean of Sanford Highmark School of Health Professions, and she will provide the introduction. So, thank you.
Good afternoon and welcome. And I'm very pleased and proud and honored to have Dr. Ben Danielson here today. I met him first through Washington State University, where I worked before I came to Concordia, and invited him to be a plenary speaker for our schools. We had nursing, pharmacy, and medical schools. And unfortunately, it was COVID, so it had to be virtual. But even through the screen, you could sense the powerful impact of the story and the journey that he has to share with you. Dr. Danielson is a pediatrician trained at the University of Washington, came from many other locations, from the East Coast to Montana to Seattle. And he currently, he was for over 20 years the director of a wonderful clinic in the center of Seattle that served the children of Seattle, called the Odessa Brown Clinic, where he worked at Seattle Children's Hospital as well. And he is now at the University of Washington as a clinical professor and doing work in particular with addressing youth and addressing and preventing youth incarceration. A complex problem. So we're thrilled to have him here today to talk a little bit about the journey toward health equity, which is a problem we would all like to be engaged in. It'll take a lot of small steps to get to where we want to go, but we welcome Dr. Danielson.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
I'm very honored to be here. Thanks very much. Does this sound okay? Great. Thank you so much for allowing me to spend time with you.
Test.
Your voice specific. Oh, there we go. Honored to be here and really glad to spend time on this campus and get to know some people. This is really a special place. There's a strong sense of connectedness and shared purpose that it just flows here. I see it in so many of the people I've met. And so I'm really feel like a slightly temporary family member here, having a chance to spend time with you all. I'm going to ramble for a bit, but in case anything I say gets too boring, my strategy the last couple of years has been to at least regale you with beautiful art so that you'll have something to look at if my voice becomes too annoying. I'm really glad to talk about this conversation around learning in the equity journey and thinking about the ways in which the challenges that we face today are both enormous, and I think that the strengths that we hold are even more enormous, or even greater, if you will. talk about these things and they sound sometimes down and dark. I use pretty plain language because I care about finding the right words to describe things. And if there are any of these words that feel harmful, hurtful, or painful to you, I do apologize ahead of time, I'm always happy to be corrected in any of the language that I use. That sound okay? Let's just start talking then. Um, the idea of really getting into this way of approaching moving forward in an equity journey takes, I think, the combination of some pain and some love, some joy and some hurt, and really being able to hold ideas at the same time that sometimes other people might want to tell you have to be either or constructs. I think there's a lot more both and in this world and in this conversation. I hope you kind of see that in some of the things that I ramble about today as well. So I'm going back to a space that I was actually channeling a little bit this morning, even with some of the deans, around where we get to a place where we have to start to understand how unfairness, inequities, racism, oppression, and things happen in the first place. And so much of that has to do with like who gets to tell the story, right? Who gets to own the narrative? Whose language, whose words, whose approach to communication gets to be the dominant form? Who gets to tell the story? I don't know if we always think about that and about what that both makes room for and what that leaves out. Although I feel like I am in a space where that very concept is really lifted up, that there are so many different ways to understand a story. And it has to come from so many different narrators through so many different narratives. The question I think that we often don't ask in this country more broadly is who is actually telling this story? Who got to do that? Who had the right to sort of fill our books with words and fill our minds through those words with ideas and concepts that are driving how we approach our world and what we think about? Who gets to tell that story? And when you have that kind of a prospect, who doesn't get to tell their story? What do we need to do? The base, the very foundations of equity, to really think about how we lift up many stories. Who gets to say what a timeline has looked like, what technology has done, where we've seen progress, who has made that progress, who owns the ideas that have populated our minds and allowed us to make a better world? Whose stories are left out? Whose voices go missing? Who is intentionally left out of a narrative? How does that affect the way we think about issues of equity and justice in this world? Because I know that we all care about that. I know that we all care about justice. I know that we all care about equity and fairness. We all care about making the world a little bit better because we've been on this planet. And it's hard work. It takes struggle. It takes sometimes the determination and the voice and the power that we learn from and see from and the people around us to help us kind of get motivated and stand up a little taller, try a little harder, and find the kind of words and language that maybe we hadn't found before. It's hard work. It's work that is based on also great pain. I want to share this with you just because I was just looking at this article this spring, early summer, and it just was shocking to me. It was a study um, that I'm embarrassed to talk about in a way on many levels. One is that this weird medical system we have sometimes takes the idea of human life, the sanctity and the beauty and the power of human life, and reduces it to these very, very odd phrases like excess mortality, excess deaths, almost as a way to sort of avoid a sense of ownership or accountability to a problem. Excess mortality, what does that really mean? It sounds like oops, I dropped something on the floor, something sort of incidental or accidental. But the numbers they're talking about in this study from years of potential life lost, so people who should not have died over the course of about 20 years, 1999 to 2020, before COVID, people who should not have lost their lives in this country, Black people who should not have died, call it excess mortality. And the number 1.63 million lives. Just want that to be at least a grounding of something that is unmistakable about the nature of inequity, unmistakable about the harm and the impact of racism in this country, unmistakable about the scope and the scale of what we're talking about. That's also 80 million years of life lost. What that means to me is that these are also, I'm a pediatrician, you'll hear me say this, but these are children's lives also being lost. These are young adults' lives being lost. These are people across age spans losing their lives, excess deaths, excess mortality. This is about something greater than a healthcare system. It's about a country and the integration of the ways in which our healthcare system and other systems create ecosystems that are unhealthy, that impact the lives of people for the very mere reason of melanin, for the very dear reason of racism in this country. These issues are important. They transcend so many parts of our history and our story, the stories that get to be told and the ones that don't get to be told, about who we are, where we've been. We live in a society where we are willing to erase other people's culture, take away their sense of self, take away their sense of belonging, take away their cultural identities, the clothes you wear, the languages that you are allowed to speak, the words that you are allowed to use, the ways in which you are allowed to honor your elders, talk about your spirituality and think about your ancestors, your very connection to the people that have loved you for generations. We're in a space in the world, in a country where that is possible, not only possible, but is happening and happened over and over again in our history and in our stories. So the cause is so important for us, right? The importance of talking about equity, talking about inequities, talking about these issues without trying to color code it, without trying to make it seem less than it is, without using an oops, I dropped something on the floor kind of, it's just really, really important. Concepts of erasure, the harm done not just by taking lives, but erasing the identity that comes with lives. Such an important part of this journey, a piece that I keep trying to learn about and understand in better ways in order to try to be a better part of something that is going in a different direction. So I learn things, I keep trying to learn. I keep making mistakes in my own language, but I'm trying to get better. And one of the things that I've sort of been trying to learn is I used to talk so much about differences in healthcare based on race, disparities based on race, racial disparities, differences in health outcomes based on race, and Ta-Nehisi Coates, and sort of a broader knowledge. I think maybe 100 different grandmothers who came to see me in the clinic and brought their kids with them were always teaching me that is the wrong language, that the cause of those 1.63 million lives lost that should not have been lost, the cause of that erasure of culture and identity is racism, not race. We make this dear and weird mistake, especially in a biologic and science-oriented field like healthcare, of talking about race and then making it seem like it's a cause for disparities when that is just false language. And people like me use that language all the time. Now, I want to make a both and kind of statement here and say that understanding the impact of health inequities by using disaggregated data and understanding those impacts based on race is actually useful. Being clear in our head that the cause of that is racism and not race, because there is no real biologic difference based on race. Therefore, there can't be that great a health harm based on race. This is racism. When you start to say that there are differences in health outcomes based on racism, you start to think about things differently. You start to think about solutions and actions in a different way. You start to think about the need to address racism rather than the need to somehow correct for race. This need to sort of make improvements in the way we approach people's beings, their sense of themselves in addition to their bodily and their physical and psychological well-being. We think about those on a deeper level when you talk about challenge and the issue being racism, challenge and the issue is not race. Does that make sense? It's just a language evolving for me. It's something I try to learn, but sorry for dwelling on that in a way. But when you start to use words in the right way, you start to think about solutions, I think, in a better way as well. So I'm learning, I'm trying to learn, and as I learn, I also try to really understand that another mistake I've made in the long time in my career is really talking about these issues and making it sound like the communities that I love and adore and work with and care about are nothing but a pile of problem lists, of challenges, of deficits. That even though behind all of that language are these the beautiful beings with brilliance and the abilities to do incredible things to change the world. Somehow in my professional space, man, I'm there talking about problem lists, about deficits. I'm even trying to create solutions that are based only on deficits. How do we address hypertension in this community? I'm not trying to say that that's the wrong approach completely, but I am wondering in some ways, if we only try to create approaches to supporting communities based on their deficits, how much are we missing out on what we could be doing to support those communities, especially if we thought about something more beautiful and holistic and broad and dynamic and brilliant and strong about a community rather than the things that we labeled for them as being lacking or weaker. I'm starting to learn. I'm trying to learn. I don't always get it right. I keep moving back and forth along my learning arc. I don't know if anybody else does, like a few steps forward, a few steps back, but it's a process. And in this process, I learn how to speak more clearly into a microphone. And you still need to pay attention to what's happening around you. It's a challenge to try to change the way we think about the healthcare system when the healthcare system has so many components baked into it that make it hard to change. Just looking at this, just as an example, it's a study from me almost 2 years ago, but it's still relevant, that shows that if you looked at electronic health records, what you would see is that the language of bias is so deeply baked into our electronic health records that it is measurably different based on the impacts of racism. Now, I do not mean that there are health records out there that says, I saw a patient, Ben Danielson, today, and I really hate him, right? What I do mean, you can measurably look at electronic health records across our systems, across our country, one healthcare network to another, and what you'll find is that the language of untrustworthiness, of distrust is built into them, the sense of not believing, of not buying, of not actually holding the words and the narrative of the person themselves as highly, as valuable, as credible, is measurably different based on racism. So that chart of Ben Danielson might say, Ben claims that he has a pain of 9 out of 10 on the scale. However, he seems to be smiling and chatting comfortably in the room with me. These are the things that we do in our ways that undermine the progress and the changes that we need to be thinking about with equity. What does it mean to be saying that I am substituting your narrative for my own, and I'm putting that into my own story about you that goes into a health record and lives on forever? It means that the next doctor, the next nurse practitioner, the next person after that and after that will understand the story of a person based on what I wrote or said or dictated many, many months, years ago, and how I baked some level of distrust, or disbelief, or racism into that language. This is the way our healthcare system has baked in deep DNA, deep challenges that make it so hard to have conversations about how we move forward. I was listening to sort of one of our pediatric heroes in health equity. His name is Joseph Wright. He's with the AAP, the Academy of Pediatrics. He was saying he was sort of helping to lead efforts to do more work to fully pull biasing and biased content out of our healthcare system. The tools and tests that sometimes determine whether or not you get to have a kidney transplant, they're different. Historically, like you get rated differently based on the melanin in your skin, not on the function of your kidneys. The chances of you getting an important surgery or procedure are different based on the language that you speak, based on the ways in which society sees you. And trying to pull all of that out, he was exhausted right away because the layers and layers of difficulty in trying to pull these issues of bias out of our testing models, tests that are kind of supposed to be, I don't know, objective-ish, really had all of these components built into them that are so hard to change and move. Our systems are big or huge. Somebody was saying these things are so big, they're so hard to start to gain purchase on and make progress on, and yet it really is the tinkering and the work and the desire and the energy of people working alone, sometimes people working in small groups, and people starting to come together and saying, this really can't continue to be this way any longer. That's how you start to see change happen. There are measures of whether or not somebody lives in this country, whether or not their culture is imperiled, whether or not they undergo different forms of erasure. There's also just the challenge of actually walking in the doors of healthcare facilities. When your skin is browner, you enter those spaces with a different kind of knowing, a different kind of experience that goes back generations. Families who walk into the hospitals that I know of, they need to gear themselves up. They need to, my mom, we put on our Sunday clothes when we went to the hospital or the clinic. You need to show up differently. You have to hide your emotions. You have to control yourself very carefully. Otherwise, if you're too emotional, if you speak out too much, this is in the data, based on the interpretation of the color of your skin, you're more likely to have security called. You're more likely to be concerning to someone else as someone violent, when all that you may be doing is expressing a deep worry and concern for a loved one who is ill. On the other hand, if you are too emotionless, if you are too stoic, if you hold too much of a shield up against expressing yourself, then you still might get a referral, a CPS or social work or CWS referral because you're not caring enough, because you're not showing enough emotion. You're not actually showing that you love your child. Maybe you're an uncaring and unfit parent. These are the things beyond the healthcare measures, beyond some of the other things that you can see in data that just show up for families who have to walk through the doors of healthcare every day. This is the one time I'll do self-promotional content. I wrote a story about this in Health Affairs a year ago, just through the lens and the voices of family experiences and what they have to go through in trying to navigate a healthcare system that doesn't believe them, doesn't want to treat them as they feel like they should. These issues are really challenging. And if for some reason this were just about dollars, if it were just about money that we'd be talking about today, if you just wanted to be the most efficient health executive, healthcare leader ever, you would still have a very strong interest in addressing issues of equity because it costs us every day in every way. It costs our healthcare system even more than it is already too expensive in this country to get healthcare. Costs us into the billions and heading towards the trillions of dollars. And it costs us in our emotional well-being as we work through the healthcare field. I was so shocked a couple of years ago when I saw this statistic that said out of 1,700 healthcare workers from all different kinds of backgrounds, that they were really feeling like 40% at least were feeling like healthcare system was on the verge of collapse. The verge of collapse. Now that's a really, really strong statement to say about a field that you're in or about to enter. And I think it says a lot about how we feel about maybe the moral conflict, maybe the heart and head conflict we face when we try to enter a field that is sometimes trying to struggle through a financial sustainability model, but is not actually fulfilling the mission model that we've all entered this field in order to be part of. These issues are challenging, and for somebody who faces different forms of discrimination in the workplace, in the healthcare field every day, they face it in every other aspect of their lives. So we have to know that there's this incredible continual circle, this flywheel almost, that says that if you are more likely to be facing discrimination and bias in healthcare, you're more likely to be facing discrimination and bias in your world, in your neighborhood. You're more likely to be more the subject of climate change impacts that affect your health. And then your health gets worse, and then you go to a healthcare system that treats you worse. And then you go back to a community where the environment is changing and making it even more unhealthy for you. These cycles and dynamics go throughout our systems, and they create outcomes that have been designed from the beginning to go the way they go. This is just one example. This is the opportunity to sort of build family wealth. Again, using the lens of racism in this one, just the chance of building significant family wealth if you're Black versus if you're white in this country. And there is no way in this country that it should be that the melanin in your skin should determine whether or not you can earn enough to actually pass on any meaningful wealth to a next generation, let alone send a next generation to college, let alone be able to own something like a home. These numbers, flat lines like that, don't happen by accident. They happen by design. All of this, understanding all of this in our role in healthcare is really important, because we also need to know that if I'm a pediatrician, I need to know that the opportunity a child has to see themselves in the stories and books and parts of our history that tell us where we came from is really important. This is the library in the Thurgood Marshall Elementary School, just a few blocks from where I live in Seattle. And I think it is so, I think it's pretty awesome to walk into a school library every day and see people who look like you in those stories and understand that you are part of that story, that you too are part of this American journey that we've all been on. We have different places and ways in which the actual idea that you can learn your history and see yourself in it is being threatened in this country. It's part of the ways in which making change happen is so difficult. Seeing yourself in the stories around you, being a young person who actually sees yourself in the spaces that help you imagine who you might be in the future, that is a powerful part of the journey that we need to be thinking about. It's a part of the hard work that we need to continue to try to unravel. I think about this heartbreaking poem that Langston Hughes wrote so long ago, and I'm still trying to wonder if it's historical or is it contemporary, because this idea that you still have to sort of make a case for why you too are American in America is such an interesting question that we are not answering, that we are not addressing yet in the ways that we should not need to be. Powerful treatise on how I too am an American should be a way in which we all feel a sense of belonging and connectedness. All of these things are not accidental. And one of the other lessons I had to learn working through stuff is really how these are parts of systems that are working exactly as they are designed. I came into healthcare kind of thinking we just needed to fix a few flaws in the system here and there, and that would make the system work better. We just needed to do a little bit of correcting, that we needed to solve for the problems in a broken system. I still sometimes say broken system, but I hope anyone around me catches me on that, because they're not broken. They're actually working perfectly. The outcomes that we're getting, the things that we're ashamed of, the things that are so harmful to our neighbors and the people that we care about, those are by design. That's a system working exactly the way it's supposed to. When you think about that, just like when you think about racism instead of race, when we're thinking about solutions and working on things, when you think about systems working well versus systems that are broken, hopefully you stop thinking that we need to fix systems. We need to transform them. We need to change them, right? These are the ways I've been trying to learn in this equity journey. I don't know if it makes any sense to you all, but I spend way too much time thinking about these things. And I try to sort of evolve my own language in a way that helps me understand what I should be doing. But it's hard, right? Because you all are busy. I know I'm busy. We have so many things in our lives that are asking for pieces of our attention and time. I've even, in my times of slight, I don't know, I don't think it's paranoid, but something, I start to wonder if there's also a design in keeping us too busy so that we cannot make the change happen that we wish we could see. If I keep you hustling enough, your good heart and the work that you want to be doing will be distracted by the work that some checklist tells you has to be done right now. If I keep you on a hectic path, perhaps you can't make the change happen that you wish you could. And I think that's a really interesting thing to wonder about, how we are weaponizing time even against ourselves in this equity journey. It makes it so hard, and it makes it hard sometimes to really contemplate how change happens when you sometimes see how perhaps people around you who are good of heart, good of soul, good of intentions, want to see things change. Don't act when acting is important. Don't step up when stepping up is really necessary. Do not speak out when your voice is really needed to be heard. And I wonder how we create a space that helps us understand that it is not always even some set of evil folks who don't believe what we believe or are out to get us in some particular way. It may even be our own most wonderful and warmest friends who may also be, in a way, getting in the way of helping us see change happen. We also have a bit of a short attention span problem in this country where we're pretty quick to see a problem is enormous and speak out and make all kinds of noise about it. And then within the span of a couple of years, decide that that's not really an issue anymore and decide that we're going to move on with some other issue that seems to paint over that past in quick succession, or make some super premature declarations of success and we move on to the next issues. This work is hard. It's hard to talk about equity. It's hard to work in the space of really addressing these issues. And yet we are in these spaces just by dint of being on this planet. And so we have to be either working towards and helping or not. And it's not like, I don't know, I'm not even really helping that much by talking to you today. And the evidence says that too. Just talking about equity issue, it just doesn't actually necessarily help. Here's one study looking at the judicial world where judges told a jury, please don't use bias or let a bias, racial bias, enter into your decision-making today. And guess what? It turns out when they studied those decisions, you're more likely to be biased when you're asked not to be biased. It's not just the judicial world, it's also true in healthcare. When strategies to address COVID, when they were trying to find ways to make sure that people practiced safe distancing and used all of the right hand washing and mask wearing during the peak concerning times around COVID. One strategy was to say, hey, if we tell people that, say, Black and brown communities are so much more at risk for death from COVID than other communities, maybe that will make these other communities much more empathetic, more compassionate about the issue of COVID and practice safer practices. It turns out they're less likely to practice safe practices when you're asking them to do it for the sake of equity. Talking is insufficient. I'm putting myself out of a job in some ways, but talking is not sufficient for this kind of work. It takes a whole different kind of dedication. It kind of takes the kind of ways in which you actually start to question in ways that are just, I think, like kind of powerful. You walk through life being told what's in your lane and what's out of it. You walk through life being told to not fight against the things that you cannot change. And then you start to think, maybe I need to question why somebody told me not to question. Maybe I need to start acting a little bit more Angela Davis. And somebody in this audience was giving me a hard time for having Angela Davis in every one of my presentations, but I'm definitely channeling Angela Davis here. And it's really time for us to start to really wonder about changing the things we cannot accept instead of accepting the things we're told we cannot change. It's really time to really embrace the idea that maybe even small insults against our dignity, our sense of ourselves, are actually worth fighting for. Fighting for in the passionate ways in which we stand up for our own selves and understand ourselves and speak for ourselves. Maybe it's time for us to start doing things differently in this equity work. I'm trying to learn. What I observe in a lot of work around healthcare equity is that it is still a diagnosis of exclusion. Do you know what I mean by that? In order to come to the conclusion that racism or some other form of oppression is being at play in some outcome, you need to first remove every other possible reason for that happening. We are still in this mentality, despite the depth of impact of things like racism on health outcomes, that we still need to seek any other conclusion first. When will we get to the point where we actually think first about the impact of racism instead of only allowing it to even enter our consciousness if we've removed socioeconomics or regional differences or whatever other set of barriers or numbers we try to use? I'm trying to learn to talk better about equity. I'm trying to learn to get beyond gap talk. And here's what I mean by that really quickly. Talking about race, talking about racism instead of race, talking about disparities has really been an evolving language thing for me. Differences in health outcomes, disparities, closing the gaps. Have you heard those phrases in a lot of this equity work? I'm trying to get beyond that. And here's why. I think when you talk about closing gaps, you really lower your sights significantly. We have a healthcare system that actually doesn't work all that well for anyone in this country. Our outcomes are pretty bad compared to a lot of other places. I guess I wonder why why the best I can hope for a Black child that I'm seeing in this community clinic could only be as bad as the bad outcomes that exist for white people in this country. Why would a zero gap that's terrible actually be a good thing? Does that make sense? And how do we sort of forestall the idea that somebody could be even better than, healthier than, could thrive in a way that's like unmeasured before, or unknown before? How do we make room for that? How do we stop talking about our work will be done when we eliminate the gaps? Because doing that is really still setting up one group, in this instance, white, as actually the gold standard. And I think we're trying to stop doing that societally in our equity work. I don't know if that makes sense. I'm trying to figure out how to talk about it. But I think it's really important because it allows us to start to take off some of the masks that we put on around this healthcare conversation, start to be a little bit more of ourselves when it's so raw that the conversation doesn't allow you to have anything else but your true self in that space. It allows you to come with your full strengths and beauties and powers and brilliance that are unfiltered by the way you're supposed to dress or behave or act when you're in a particular kind of space. It allows you to explore ideas and thoughts in the ways that I'm seeing Concordia really tries to lift up. And it allows you even to question your own narratives and your own ideas and thoughts. Questioning my own narratives. Okay, so this is hard work for me because, I don't know, those things get really strongly connected to us, right? Like, I had all these really cool elders and aunties in Washington, D.C. growing up giving me really, really good advice about how to survive the world. I got my version of what was called the twice as good speech. I don't know if anybody else had twice as good speeches in their lives. The speech would go something like this. You're a Black boy. People soon are going to see you as scary and dangerous. They're going to experience you as less intelligent and less able. You got to be twice as good as anyone else in the room. You got to dress twice as well. You got to speak twice as articulately. You have to come with twice as much knowledge, and you have to show up that way every single time. That's the only way to survive. I found that advice really helpful and motivating in many ways, but I wonder now about that narrative. I wonder about the narratives that I taught myself in order to get by. Here's another one. If you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. Do whatever you need to do to keep moving forward. My aunties told me this one a lot. Just keep moving forward. Do whatever you need to do. Now I wonder today, I wonder about my narratives, what I've taken in and decide to put out there. Why in the world would I ask you to crawl in order to move forward? Instead of asking our systems to be transformed so that we're not asking anybody to crawl ever. What is it about expecting suffering, expecting struggle, expecting actual crawling, the demeaning and indignifying practice of crawling to be the way that you move forward in the world? Maybe you have a narrative like that too. Maybe somebody told you something that inspired you at the time and helped you be better, maybe got you to this room and this space the way you are today. But I wonder if we have narratives that also hold us back as a country, as a society, in our own minds and in our own hearts. I just wonder, maybe somebody would share something after I finish rambling. These issues are important. They come from great wisdom and knowledge, and there is still strength in understanding what our ancestors had to give to us, the gifts that they gave us to grow from. This is actually the first medical director of the clinic that I worked at for 20 years. Her name was Blanche Levizo, first African-American pediatrician to practice in the Northwest as a woman, the first to lead a clinic like ours. And she started the clinic in 1970 with this concept of quality care with dignity. I thought that was like an old phrase when I first came to the clinic. I thought that was like just like some tired thing you might have said in the 70s. I wasn't really as aware of the 70s, so maybe this was something that had much more purchase back then. I find it extremely relevant today that the idea of dignity has equipoise, is equally and maybe covalently connected to the idea of quality. The dignity without quality is probably somebody showing you empathy but not doing something for you. And quality without dignity is probably a harsh treatment that actually doesn't lift you up as a human being. Dignity and quality are covalently bonded. A concept from a long time ago that I think maybe we need to lift up and really talk more about today. Because when those kinds of ideas get lifted up, then all of a sudden people start working together to do great things. People start being willing to come together over causes that are important and don't give up on them. People are willing to risk their own freedom and safety in order to see social justice and change happen. People of all colors, all backgrounds, all theologies, ideologies, cultures, willing to take the risk of being imprisoned in order to see social justice and change happen. We used to do that. We used to be able to do that. I don't know of anybody who's willing in this way to take these risks, even especially perhaps when it's not about your own back, your own butt that you're actually activating for. How do we get to those spaces? How do we build in that kind of energy? And I think it really comes from hope, a sense of deeper and stronger hope. I've come to believe that hope is not something you hope for. Hope is not something you hope will happen, that you wait for, that you wait passively to show up in your space. Hope is an active verb that you go out and you grab and you get and you make it happen. You bring it into your life and you live it and you push it and you give it to other people, and it becomes an energy that is extremely powerful. It becomes the font of growth and energy and determination and change that is amazing. Hope is its own form of energy and resource. Hope gives you the power to do things that you haven't done before. And then you start to think of different ways to do your practice. What if you had an equity pause in your work, in your programs, in your directives? I stole this from the world of surgery. In the OR, one of the greatest ways to increase safety is the timeout. You get a clipboard, you just stop what you're doing, you make sure you're all good. Everybody here? Do we have everything we need? This is a machine that goes pinging. If something goes wrong, do we know what we need to have? Just that quick checklist. And I think maybe even more importantly, that pause right before you cut into someone's skin makes you a safer surgeon. And I wonder if in our work towards equity, just a pause. We're about to launch this program. We're about to start this school. We're about to create this residency program. Let's pause and ask a couple of questions. Have those most impacted by being sort of marginalized in the past been included in this decision making? What are the unexpected things that could happen that could be beneficial or could be actually negative? Who's included and who's left out? Who's going to benefit the most? I don't know. It could be 4 questions you could ask in a pause. Maybe it's right before you make a clinical decision, right before you decide to start a research project. A pause, just like a surgeon does. What would an equity pause look like? What else could you do? What if we took lessons from the world of improvements through addressing things like different abilities? What if we did something that I call focused universalism? In this case, when crossing the street is difficult for somebody who's using something with wheels to move around, you put a curb cut in, right? And then they can cross the street safely. Lo and behold, when you do that, all of a sudden, I don't know, like me with my gimpy hip, I need a hip replacement, man, and so it's coming up in my head a little bit. I cross the street a little more safely too, because that curb cut's there, and I'm not like unstable. Maybe that mom or dad with that stroller crosses the street a little safer because that curb cut's there. Maybe an elder who needs a little more support gets across more safely. My point is, when you focus on the needs of those most distant from something beneficial, you make sure it works for them, turns out it works for everybody. Focused universalism. If you did programs based on the people who are the furthest from justice, furthest from access to your program, it would actually make your program better for everyone. What if we did things like that? What if we made it so easy to speak up when something unjust was happening that it was championed? I was so surprised and pleased by this Pittsburgh Highmark Health that was really thrilled when they did some anti-bias training, and then they opened up a bias portal, and it was filled, and they were happy about it. They weren't troubled or like, oh my God, we have a huge problem. They were happy because people were actually communicating their needs and understanding and identifying biases. What if we made it good to make that kind of voicing and expression part of your work? What if we created ways to lift up the stories and the experiences of other people in a way that makes them much more connected to the people around you and the ways in which you walk through the world? I was so impressed in the Methow Valley part of Washington, which is dealing with, well, what you all deal with too, this fifth season kind of year, right? Winter, spring, summer, fall, and then fire season, and how impactful that is on their communities. So they created actually installations in their health facilities that just share the stories of those experiences through the voices of those most impacted by it. What does that do differently about how you show compassion for your fellow human being and how they understand what's happening around them? What if we created so many different ways to support and understand how we love and connect with each other that the normalcy of it just becomes kind of commonplace in the world around us, that the sense of strength and identification for the power of family is just something that we love and celebrate every day, that the ways in which we are different is something wonderful, not something to try to be solved for, and that the ways that we seek to understand each other are deep power of understanding through the only real gift we have in healthcare, to be honest, which is our ability to listen. What if that were the most important tool that we were using every single day and in every way? What would it be like to really see through someone else's eyes because you took the time to actually do that work? What if our healthcare goal was actually dignity? What if we were lifting up the power of dignity so strongly that we made it one of our desired goals for somebody's well-being and strength? What if dignity became such an incredibly important thing that it bonded people who had very, very different experiences and different backgrounds in a way that made them want to work together and help to undo all of the challenges that I've been ranting about? What if dignity conversation was the way to talk about racism in a space where people aren't ready or willing to talk about racism? I've had to do some of this, talking about prisons and things in rural communities, and yeah, it's not that easy to say, can we be anti-racist in every single space? That's just not a welcome conversation. But I have never had anybody say that they did not want to talk about dignity. And I think that every piece of the roots and the power of understanding dignity are the kinds of the roots and the power that helps you understand racism. Can we make dignity a conversation that is able to transcend whatever language barriers, and I mean we all speak the same language but we don't use the same words, kind of barriers that allow us to kind of get to a space where we're talking differently? Can we understand dignity in such a way that we know that dignity just doesn't mean just getting the appropriate help when you need the help, but having so many beautiful and powerful resources in your own communities that you don't need to reach outside of your community for support and help? Can we understand the strength of the ways in which we support each other in such powerful ways that I am going to share my last, but not last forever, learning with you, last for now, which is I think that there's something about this equity work that defies Newtonian laws of gravity. I think they're more powerful than what Newton taught me about gravity. And what I mean is, I actually believe that it is easier to lift people up than it is to hold them down. I think oppression is hard work. I think oppression is exhausting us as a country. I think oppression is making us feel like we can't keep doing this every day. I think oppression is weaponized into keeping us busy in ways that don't allow us to be our best selves. I think lifting people up is incredibly lightening work. It gives you a different kind of extra strength that is different than the work that you've been doing before. I think it's easier to lift people up than it is to hold them down. And I wonder if we worked that way, if we thought that way, if we did stuff with that kind of a sense of energy in our minds, what are the different things that we could do? I just wonder, well, how would we see brilliance and ability and power differently? How would we start to see brilliance instead of deficit in the world around us? And maybe more importantly, how would we start to organize our work differently? These were just a couple of what ifs I thought about around the healthcare field, but I'm sure there are tangents that could go into every other piece as well. What if we worked from a healthcare practice that was pro-dignity, that really lifted up and understood dignity? What if we had healthcare records that had to start with statements like, this kid is so brilliant because? Because when you name brilliance first, then you got to back that up, then you got to believe it, and that leads the narrative that you're creating about a young person in their health record. What if every health record itself had an asset list that was longer than the problem list, and you had to name that asset list in addition to naming whatever we call the deficits and the problems? What if, I don't know, what if every program meeting began with an idea that you had to start with a sentence like, based on what we know about the brilliance in this community, not the diabetes in this community, but the brilliance in this community, we should be doing this. What if we didn't fear or avoid having conversations like this about racism and oppression, and didn't find it so overwhelming that it felt like we couldn't move forward, but instead found it so inspiring that so many good people could care so much about this issue that nothing could get in the way of change, that we'd be willing to risk whatever we needed to make sure that this world really lived up to the values that a place like Concordia really tries to express, propel, inspire, and push people into. I think these are really interesting questions. I'm still trying to learn. You can tell I'm not even figuring half of this stuff out yet. But I did want to show a little bit of where I was going, what kinds of things I'm trying to grow through, and I'm wondering if you have some thoughts or things to share about where you're growing and what you're learning as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ben. What an incredible presentation. We're going to do just a little bit of conversation here that Gwen's going to lead us in, and then we're going to break open the conversation to all of you and to those of you who are also online. We also know we're mindful that it's coming up on 1 o'clock, and so some of you may have to leave. Please feel free to do so if your schedule requires. Okay, Gwen, to you.
Thank you, Ben. It is just so extraordinary. I wish I could bottle it and take it with me, which is going to be my question. But every slide tells you something important and gives you some sense of what it is that we need to do. And I just want to ask you, Ben, to think out loud. You've seen our students, a few of them. You know a little bit about the School of Health Professions. You know a little bit about Concordia. What can we do to be the transformers? What can we teach? What skills can we develop? What experiences can we make sure that they have so that when they join a healthcare system, they feel that they're empowered to be transformers?
So I'm enough of a rebel to want to answer that from an asset side instead of a what's missing side. And so I really do, you made us pause and read the stone with the mission statement. And every single word on that stone, I think is transformative, is empowering the kind of future-looking change that you are really trying to see happen. I've been in conversations already in a brief time today where people from completely different backgrounds, history, business, from physical therapy to social work and nursing, spending time together talking about their journeys and sharing a journey with somebody, especially maybe somebody who thinks really differently than you. I think that's magic, and I think that that's one of the key components as well. I hope for the kind of strength that you instill in people so that when they leave the safe space of exploration of every brave question possible on this campus, they're still able to carry that bravery into the world around them and ask the questions, even ask why someone is telling them not to ask the questions.
I hear the joy come out of you when you're talking about an extremely difficult, discouraging reality. So, how do you keep that joy?
This almost came up at breakfast also. Yeah, and I would love to hear other people's thoughts about like anything you care about. How do you keep doing it even when it's hard? Um, I don't I don't think there's a, a more sinister recipe or something that's more difficult to navigate in other spaces or other things that you do that are difficult. Somehow we talk ourselves into the impossibility of equity, of justice, before we even try. And I just wonder if we could apply some of the ways that we use strength in so many great ways in other parts of our life with the same expectation of success instead of the expectation of it failing. How many times do you hear that, right? I'd like to try, but I know it won't work. I mean, some version of that in taking on something like this big challenge around addressing racial equity. I I think we need to have the expectation of success. That doesn't mean it happens like right away, but it does mean that you continue to expect it to happen, and that carries its own kind of momentum with it. I did not answer your question.
Again later, maybe if you about your personal joy. But I would like to have a question from the audience. If Ivana, uh, we asked Marshall, please come to the microphone and be the first student to ask a question of Dr. Danielson.
And then for the rest of the audience, if you have questions as well, now's the time to start thinking of them and then maybe even line up at the mic.
Hello. I met you earlier at breakfast. For those who don't know, my name is Ivana Marshall. I'm a senior here. Healthcare administration is my major. And the question for you, I really enjoyed the fact that you talked about the kind of the pause or the timeout um, thing, but how can we incorporate that into our daily lives of taking the equity pause in our daily lives and then our future organizations?
I've talked to a couple of organizations into trying it, and they're working on implementing it and using their own um, morphing of the approach as well, and it's really interesting. Valley Medical Center, which is kind of a complex health center serving a lot of different cultures and socioeconomics and things, is using it in their a lot of their practices and finds it adds a little bit of time and it brings a lot of saved time and a lot of tragedies averted, and it actually brings them closer together, makes them work in a way that feels more meaningful to them and holds them closer to their purpose. Those are their experiences so far. But I think the idea is to try it and experiment with it. Find one or two places where you can just insert it, maybe even extremely briefly at first. Just like, hey, we're about to make a decision. Let's just pause. Is there anything else we need to take into account? And then you start to say, well, maybe we can use this a little bit more with some more structured questions so we can compare across our agency or organization how people are using this tool. I do firmly believe it's the pause that's more important than the content, to be honest. But I encourage you to, when you're a leader of a major health organization, to have that be part of your institution.
Thank you.
Right. And Cusa, before you come up to the mic, and then we're going to take an online question that I think will be relatively fast. Somebody said, incredible visual slides complemented that presentation. It's beautiful. Where are they found?
Oh, wall art all over this country, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, lots of travel. And during COVID, it just felt especially important to make sure that we asserted that there was an outside world there that was beautiful. So
Thank you, Dr. Chen, and thank you as well, Dr. Danielson. First of all, Mugira Mahoro, peace be with you in my mother tongue, Kinyarwanda. It's funny that you talked about the online comment, because I was going to say, as a communication scholar, it's just wonderful. Because the interesting thing is the topic you're touching is obviously very, I've been in such presentation when you leave rallied and you're like, oh, I'm so angry. But there was that holistic approach of you showing art, and as you know, art as well as a form of healing. So there was that equilibrium throughout your presentation. So thank you very much for this. Now my question is: so being from Rwanda, a country that next year is going to commemorate, excuse me, the 30th commemoration of the genocide against the Tutsi. I'm always found in questions about nation building, and Rwanda has done it. I'm always proud to say that Concordia used to send students every May for a seminar. So visit Rwanda, just plugging that out there. But it's just when it comes to nation building, and Canada, I was in a meeting last Monday. Canada was celebrating last weekend Truth and Reconciliation. They do it every year, and the topic you mentioned, I'm always thinking about trust. And when you think of coming back to my home country, we had to rebuild that trust. We had to bring back dignity. We had to bring the offended parties and the perpetrators at the table and say, hey, one nation, gotta build back this trust and live together again. So I'm just curious from your experience of what you've seen in community building, but as well trust towards a system, like you said, that has uh, from a data perspective, broken that trust again. What do you think is some of the maybe not a solution because it's a long life journey of rebuilding trust, but what are some of the maybe um, temporary solutions you've seen that we can maybe emulate in our respective lives, but as well when we're breaking a trust in a community or breaking a trust in some of the line of work we do every day? What are some of the easy steps you've seen that is a great way to rebuild that trust? Thank you.
I'd love to have a long conversation on a long walk in a beautiful hill in Rwanda with you about that, because I think that's a whole, maybe that's a whole topic and conversation itself. I'll say two things really fast. One is I think we make a mistake in saying that we need to build trust instead of saying we need to do the things that are actually the things that are consequential that will be trustworthy. Um, I got so sick during COVID of people saying we need to build trust with the community so they'll get their jabs. And it wasn't because I didn't believe in the jabs. I definitely did. But that idea of like we need trust as a transactional product is so insulting. So when somebody says to me, you know, like, "What's your trust building practice?" I say, I want to have a practice of building deep, powerful relationships that are both painful and joyful. And out of that, I actually know will come trust, but I'm not going to be talking about trust as the goal. When you talk about trust as the goal, you're actually trying to manipulate somebody. The way it showed up, I don't mean that in the way you're asking the question, but I do think the focus on trust has become twisted in a way. Do the right things, trust will come. Shoot for trust, I don't think you'll ever get there.
Hello, Shelley Gump with the Healthcare Leadership Program. Thank you for being here. I have the honor of teaching the Healthcare Justice first year seminar here at the school, and I'm always delighted and empowered by the students that sit in my classroom. And we've used some of your lectures and other things in our classroom. And this year, each first year seminar had to, were chosen to create a pact for their group. And one of the individual statements at the very bottom of their pact was to be comfortable at being uncomfortable. And I was so thankful and pleased to hear that as one of their pacts. But I'm curious, I saw it on your slide, and I know it's something that I need to work on every day. I'm just curious, what advice do you have for those of us that want to continue on this equity journey to be uncomfortable or being comfortable with uncomfortable conversations and driving those conversations?
You said it all. I think it's so important. And it comes with also the idea of non-closure, right? That things don't begin or end with one set of conversations, one semester, or one dialogue at lunch. This is something that should not feel like easily digested or that you've just completed something, but it should be a journey. A journey has a lot of discomfort and a lot of great things about it as well, as you all know. And it's maybe more important just not to run away from the discomfort. Sometimes you have to sit with that. That is actually part of, I think, a path that leads to trustworthiness, is to be able to say like, yeah, wow, you just told me I did wrong. I'm acknowledging I did wrong. And we're not just gonna like have a hug right away. still some really, really painful feelings that go back generations, perhaps. But I'm staying with you in this.
I wonder if there's maybe there are one or two more questions from our audience, either online or in person, as a concluding offering. Please, yeah. And if you would please use the microphone, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Use it better than I have.
We got there. We got there.
Hello. I haven't actually asked this question to anyone before, so I'll try and articulate it as best I can. I've viewed statistics mostly in terms of crime because that's been my area of interest. Yours is obviously healthcare, but this will be a similar application. When you're viewing statistics and they discuss uh, different classifications of people, one of the things I noticed was that so you have the ethnic term for people that were in this country and they experienced some form of racialized segregation. So there's an ethnic connotation to that. But it also gets connected to people that come at different times, through different places, have different experiences, probably don't even believe in the same races, and they're considered the same group because they have, they look a certain way. So, how do you think we could improve our categorizations moving forward?
A lot of work we could be doing, not only in just like uh, understanding the meaning behind the way we categorize, but also improving our categorizations. It's a complicated thing in a beautiful way to me in some ways, because I do believe you could arrive in this country 2 years ago, 10 years ago, but you still might be treated like someone who's been in this country for many generations genetically. And so the treatment, which may be indicative of bias and oppression and may even impact your health outcome, still might happen to you, even though you are not the descendant of enslaved people in America. So there is still something relatively valid about that, even though so much of that is such a weird social construct anyway, right? It's how you're perceived, and it's some portion of your self-identification, and it's really messy, and it's over junked together, and that is deeply problematic and deserves a lot more work. And it's still true that the recent immigrant could be treated badly based on the treatment that's happened to somebody who's been here for many generations. Does that make some sense?
Uh, no, that doesn't exactly. Well, it makes sense, but it doesn't exactly address the question. So let's say someone's being discriminated against, not because they look a certain way, but actually because they behave a certain way, and that happens to correlate with how they appear. Well, obviously, you need to differentiate in order to narrow that down. So, how would you actually separate? So, let's say you have people you consider to be black, uh, actual black people that experienced racialized segregation, and people who you call black because I don't know why you lump them in together.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point. And I think a lot of people are doing more work to separate out those different groupings and different measurements, just like maybe people from the Marshall Islands might be lumped into an Asian category when their experiences are completely different than someone Japanese or Korean background or something like that. I think that work is really important to do. And I think, it, like you said, it translates into the way we might make better decisions, both in the criminal justice space and in the healthcare space. Yeah, necessary work. Good point.
I want to get to our final student question, and then we can conclude for our time. So please step up to the microphone. Yeah.
Thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you. Thanks for your question.
Hello, Dr. Danielson. Thank you for your time. My name is Samaya Abukar. I'm a first-year student here at Concordia. Earlier, you really mentioned the importance with the quote of moving forward. My question is, what advice would you give to students who are interested in fields of healthcare to keep moving forward when 39% out of roughly 1,200 say that the American healthcare system is on the verge of collapse?
Yeah. It is kind of like, okay, do I want to am I in a used car lot or am I in a dreamscape where I can actually imagine something different happening? And do I want to be part of, from an opportunity perspective? And I just have to say, in most basketball camps and stuff, I was absolutely most likely to be the most improved player. Not the best player at first, but the most improved player. Maybe some of that twice as good really did work. But I think what I mean by that is coming into a situation that is full of flaws and challenges and being able to exert all of the skill and talent that you have as an individual and actually see it change. You might not have that opportunity if it were already high functioning. So the chance to be part of that change, that's like a lifetime wish, isn't it? Maybe there's opportunity in there. It doesn't mean we justify injustice, but the work moving ahead becomes all the more important, and every piece of progress you make, even if it seems incremental to some people's eyes, is actually golden, is so valuable. So you're doing something wonderful if you're staying in that space and choosing to make it different. It's also an important moment to know that you have choices. You always have choices, and probably more choices than anybody else will let you know that you have. And so you can go in any direction you want to. You can step off that journey when you want to and start a different one. And just knowing that, even if that's because you know that the system's really messed up to begin with, that's actually kind of a really powerful thing as well. So you get to change a lot, and you know your own agency, and you know your own worth. There's something good that you can be making from that.
To influence the affairs of the world is a heavy job, right? That's what we want to do. Thank you.
Indeed. Ben, thank you so much. Gwen, thank you so much. And just what a wonderful session. Audience members, thank you for all of your participation. I think I would like to give a round of applause to you. Just a remarkable topic, and you have a profound way of communicating it, Ben. Thank you so much. Just a tiny bit of advertisement. I think you'll find that our next event, which I was going to project, but I think the computer went to sleep, so we can just do this orally. Our next event on November 6th is going to be with Dr. Scott Winship. And Scott is a sociologist who does economic research at the American Enterprise Institute on economic mobility and sort of climbing social ladders. It is going to be interesting. The slide, Ben, that you shared on multi-generational wealth is exactly the kind of work that he does. And so I encourage you, take those cards that are on your table. There's a QR code there. Click it, and you'll find the registration link is right there on the front page and ready to go. We'd love to see all of you then, again, on November 6th. Thank you for showing up. Again, Dr. Danielson, thank you. Thank you so much.